Welcome to the Soulfire Podcast, where every day we talk about real life, real shit, real raw. On this show, you can expect us to dive deep into topics like marriage, parenting, money, business, feeling like you want to give up, fighting for yourself, just straight soul healing. This podcast is all about life. Hey there, it's Power Coach Alishia here, your source of fun, funny, exciting, entertaining, and educational life coaching, transformational speaking, and soul healing. We're talking about setting your soul on fire. I specialize in helping women put themselves first without feeling guilty, getting out of their own way, and finding themselves again. No fluff, no hand-holding, no bullshit here, just love, light, and peace as we journey through this thing called life. Gosh, I don't even know what to say. It has taken me 9 years to get to the point of releasing this podcast that is just 100% unapologetically me. So this is our introduction episode where you get to meet me, Power Coach Alishia, hear my story, and the whole reason why I created the Soul Fire podcast. Now, don't skip this episode because this is the heart of everything. This is the soul deep of everything. And I want you to know the perspective that I'm coming from, the heart that I'm coming from, where we're going with this, and that this podcast is so different than any other podcast you've ever listened to. The thing that I also want to mention is that this is an adult-only podcast. So if you have little ears and you don't want them to hear swearing or, to hear us talking about topics like sex or low sex drives or, different things like that, then just know to wear headphones, or maybe you want to listen to it in the car when the kids aren't with you. But one thing I will say that I think is really important is if you have preteens or teens that you feel like need that power, that support, that fire, and that help, this would be a great podcast for them with a lot of the other topics that we're talking about that can help change their life. I'd also like to mention that I will not be editing this podcast at all. So, your intro music's going to be edited. There'll be some commercials that will obviously be chopped together with the music. But for the most part, the actual coaching that I'm doing on this podcast is going to be straight soul fire. And any stuttering or doorbells or dogs barking or pigs oinking, I'm always going to do my best to keep those things to a minimum. However, I record this podcast in my house, and we're pretty much a stay-at-home family, so usually there is stuff going on all around me, but I just want you to know that I'm not going to really be doing much editing just due to the fact that I want this to be me. I want it to be real and raw and just be able to show up and riff off of what's on my heart and on my mind, and that's where the real power comes from. The other thing to know is that listening to this podcast, you may find yourself feeling a whole bunch of different emotions that maybe you've been hiding. So you might be listening to the podcast and cry. You might find that some fear creeps up, or frustrations or overwhelm of things that you've been through or you're going through, or things that you thought that you were over, that you had buried deep enough. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to free you of that shit that you have been holding back and pushing down, and help you step into your personal power and get out of your own way and put yourself first without feeling guilty, and just finally find yourself again. I want you to love your life and love yourself at those levels that you crave. And you might be listening to this thinking, I do love myself, and I do love my life. And I'm not talking about that superficial level that you've gotten yourself to, that sustained level that you have finally manipulated all of your emotions and everything you've been through to the point where now you can sustain. I'm talking about really feeling that way, really living, and not living from a place knowing that you have this shit buried deep inside that can creep up at any moment. And I will tell you that you might be listening to this and thinking, this is not me at all. Like, I've got my shit together. My life is amazing. I'm so happy. Then, it may not be the podcast for you. It just may be a resource that you have for other people, because I'm here talking to you, the woman who feels like she's lost herself, or even the man who feels like he's lost himself. You're kind of going through the motions, you're feeling disconnected, and you don't really know how to reconnect with the person that you are and work through the shit that's been there or that you've been through. That's what this podcast is actually about. Now, before I tell you my story, I do want you to know that everything that we talk about here is real. Right off the bat, in just a minute, we're going to actually go into my personal introduction and actually meeting me. It's going to get deep right off the bat. It's raw, and it may hit you to the core. Feel like you got kicked in the gut. And that's good, because that's exactly what this podcast is all about. I want it to feel like it's therapy. I want it to feel like you come here and you shed the shit and grow through, right? I don't want it to feel like rainbows and butterflies and fluff and like, oh my God, she's so amazing and da-da-da and rah-rah. Like, I want you to think I'm amazing, because I believe I am, but from a place of changing your life, not from a place of being your rah-rah cheerleader, right? Now, I do believe that you'll come to some of the sessions and you'll be on fire. Like, you feel like you can take over the world, because that's me. That's why I named myself Power Coach Alishia, because so many people would tell me, dude, when I talk to you, when you coach me, when I'm around you, when you help me, I leave your presence feeling like I can do anything. The world is at my fingertips, and I love that feeling. And so that's how I gave myself the name Power Coach Alishia. So there are sessions you're going to leave feeling fired up to fucking do shit, right? But there are going to be sessions that you leave and you feel sad. And it's not because I made you feel sad. It's because you're facing reality, and there's shit that you have to grow through and actually go through and free yourself of, to move to that next level of your life, because that's what I'm here for. All right. Always remember, real life, real shit, real raw. Now, I do want to preface my introduction, because we haven't gotten to that yet, a little bit, but not too much, that I want to share with you some major things that I have been through in my life, so that you understand that I'm not some person sitting here on their throne or their high horse telling you what to do. A lot of people feel like, because I'm so young, that there's a good chance I haven't lived a lot of life. And I have been a coach for a lot of years. I've coached businesses since, let me think, 2003. So I was 19, right? And at the time I'm launching this podcast, I'm 37. But the truth is, by the time I had turned 26, I had already lived a lot of life. I had buried my real dad, I had buried my stepdad, I'd buried my grandpa, and I had already been divorced. The divorce was shit. My stepdad died at like a drop of a hat. My papa had gone in for knee surgery. He died at the drop of a hat. That's a lot of life to live at such a young age. So I just want you to know that everything I talk about is from experience. All right. So I'm going to show up for you soul deep. We're always going to be talking about things that come up in my day-to-day life that trigger some sort of story or teaching point for you, but it's also because it was a teaching point for me, or a client who says something to me that triggers something that would be an amazing teaching point for the podcast. Every couple of months, I launch my Get Your Shift Together workshop, which is a free 9-day workshop where I'm helping you have daily shifts in your life to, again, get out of your own way, put yourself first without feeling guilty, and find yourself again. So I hope that this has given you a good introduction to my introduction as we go through this very first episode of Soul Fire. So when I was in 6th grade, I was 12 years old, and I was teased a lot because I was born and raised in Utah, and there's not a lot of Black people in Utah. Push pin. Can I just put a quick push pin here? This podcast for me personally will never be about like race and color and oppression and those sorts of topics. in this explanation of my story, I just have to tell you what happened to me so you can get a good baseline of how I became the person that I am to be this powerful soul to help you fight for yourself and find yourself again. But I just want to make that a point because it's so important to me to show you from my perspective and my life and how I was raised and to say what I'm about to say next. And that is, my mom raised me with the mindset that there's nothing I can't do. My mom raised me with the power that if I put my mind to it, that I can achieve it, that I can do it, and that she would be there for me every single step of the way, whatever she could do to help me get there. My skin color, my gender, she never, ever, ever let me or allowed me or put any of those things in my mind. My history of, African Americans and, poverty and all of that. She never, ever, ever taught me that those were things that held me back and stopped me from, doing, being, and having anything I want. So when you listen to this story, please know that it doesn't come from that place. It's just my story and it is true. So it's not to say that I haven't dealt with the racism and the different things, but those things have never, ever held me back. And until the day I die, they never will. So with that being said, I will continue on unpushpin my story. So because, being born and raised in Utah in a very small town, actually, so Utah already didn't have a lot of Black people. And then in the little town I was in didn't have a lot of Black people either. I was teased a lot about being Black. And in this instance, when I was in 6th grade, I was actually the only Black child in the entire school. So for all intents and purposes, it was easy to target me, right? And this one kid constantly attempted to outcast me because of the fact that I was Black. So he always bullied me. Now, at this exact same time, my real dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. So here I am being teased about being Black. And the best thing that this kid could come up with was that I was left in the oven too long or the frying pan too long. And I would just brush it off and tell him to shut up. And I would walk away. I would really just ignore him. And it never really got to me because, again, my mom raised me to not allow those things to get to me. Now, did it bother me? Of course, but it didn't incapacitate me or, stop me. But he did this to me all the time. And so at the beginning or the first while, I was strong enough, right? And I was able to handle it. And I was basically able to just shut him down and put him in his place. And then one day we went on a field trip and I thought it would be really fun to lay down on the slide. And so I laid down and I went off the edge of the slide and I landed on my tailbone. And it was one of the most ridiculously painful things I've ever experienced in my whole life. And I actually experienced that tailbone pain all the way through until I had a hysterectomy when I was 33 years old. So from 12 years old to 33 years old, that one stupid decision to lay down on that slide, it caused me pain again until I had that hysterectomy. And it was really horrible. But anyways, back to the story. So the next day after that field trip, I ended up not going to school. Now, I didn't not go to school because of my tailbone. I actually didn't go to school because my dad was sick with cancer, as I said, and he was on a feeding tube and he had ended up pulling the feeding tube out of his nose that morning as I was leaving for school. Now, my mom had a full-time job and she worked at the Federal Reserve Bank. And she took the bus every day. So she was already gone by the time this all happened. So there was actually no way I could go to school, and she wasn't able to stay home with him because she wasn't even there and had already missed so much work that she wasn't able to come home. So at this point in the cancer spreading or journey or however you want to word that, he wasn't lucid or anything like that. So you couldn't have conversations with him. So it was my job to stay there with him until the nurses could come on shift and re-put the feeding tube back in and take care of him. So that, I could go to school the next day. So while I waited for the nurses to come, hindsight looking back, that's a huge responsibility for a 12-year-old, right? But it had to be done. I look at my youngest and, he's 12 and I think, holy shit, me getting up and going to work. And here he is, sitting with my husband. I just think of that, and just being with him and, cleaning up the mess and making sure everything's okay. And putting everything back together and stopping the beeping machine. I think it's crazy to think about my 12-year-old doing that. And in this instance, and I think back to that moment because I remember it wasn't hard for me. So it's just weird. I feel like, holy shit, that would be crazy for Stratton to do. But then I think about me and it wasn't crazy. It was just what had to be done. So anyways, the next day when I went to school, after, cracking my tailbone off the edge of the slide, all the kids were making fun of me. So now it wasn't about the fact that I was black with one kid bullying me. It was all the kids who had been on that field trip were making fun of me because I'm the girl who broke her butt. Now, kids are cruel, whatever. But in this moment, it was way too much for me. And it was hilarious and everybody was making fun of it. So now this is another thing that I had to deal with. And I remember getting so mad. There was a whole group of kids. I can see it right now. They're hanging out in the hall. And I remember getting so mad and screaming at the top of my lungs that my dad was dying of cancer. And that's why I missed that day. And I had to stay home because of his feeding tube. And I remember just badgering me and following me and and laugh. And I screamed that at them and they just go silent. They had no idea what to say. It was really weird, because it was awkward for them, but I don't even know, I don't know why I even said it, but I was just, I guess, so overwhelmed that was the only thing I could think to do to defend myself. And so here I am just at the end of my rope. I'm so frustrated. I hate this. You've got the kid bullying me because I'm black. And I remember, and I never tell this part of the story, but my teacher was a complete asshole and I wanted to be in Mr. Senna's class, but instead I was in Mr. Tonioli's and he was an asshole and it was hard for me to be there. Sixth grade was fucking horrible. Can I just put that out there? And so anyways, I came home from school that day and I was so upset, just so pissed off. And it was the weirdest thing. When I walked in that front door, my dad was completely lucid. He was sitting on the couch. He was doing bills. He had this weird thing about putting sticks in the windows everywhere we lived. Even though the windows could shut and whatever and lock, he would still put sticks in the windows. I don't know if that's a thing that came from living in the projects of St. Louis or I don't know, but he always put sticks in the windows so that if someone tried to open it, it would stop it. So he was putting those in the windows. He was doing all this weird stuff. He was on the phone. It was the weirdest thing. And, he went from, pulling the feeding tube out of his nose to the next day, a normal person. I could talk to them. We could have a conversation. And at that moment, as a 12-year-old, I literally had no idea what it meant. I told this story one day as an adult and someone finally told me what it meant. It has a term, right? And I was just so excited. To me, I thought that meant that my dad was going to be okay, I thought that he was going to be great and we were going to fish again and I would get to go to work with him and he was going to live, In my mind, he was fighting the cancer or whatever, but, obviously that wasn't true. And I'm sure that you probably know that this is their last hurrah before they die, and that's what happened. So he died shortly after that because he died on September 9th of 1995. So this is crazy now when I think back to this is the beginning of the school year. Oh, that's so nuts. But anyways, back to my story again. I was so pissed off when I came home from school that day. And then, thrown off that my dad was there up and moving and just normal drinking Pepsi and, doing his normal thing. I remember like slumping down on the couch. Well, at first I had asked him, like, what are you doing? Da 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 da. And he was acting normal. So you don't, and in my household, you don't question adults, So once I was like, what are you doing? Are you okay? Whatever. And he answered me, I wasn't going to like, you need to go to bed and da 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 da. Like, you didn't boss your parents around. So I just let him do what he was doing. And I slumped down on the couch and he said, what's wrong, baby girl? And I told my dad that I hated being black and that I was sick of it. I was just like, that's what came out of my mouth. That's how I felt. I just felt so defeated at that point. It was like I was the brunt of the whole fucking 6th grade class, and everybody thought it was hilarious to make fun of me. There were like 4 or 5 different classrooms of kids, and everybody had found out that I broke my tailbone. This other kid had been bullying me for months at this rate, or I guess not months. I guess it would have only been weeks since it was August. In my mind, it felt like months. But if I sit here and think about it as I tell you the story, he bullied me in 5th grade as well. So he always bullied me up until what's coming up in my story. But I told my dad that I hated being black and I was sick of it. And he said, never. He said, look at me. And he had this way of like gritting his teeth, I was like, you look at me right now. And I was like, yes, sir. And, I looked at him and he said, you never, and I mean ever, let anybody make you feel bad for who you are. And that was the moment that became the core of who I am. That was the moment that I held on to for a very, very, very long time. And I just walked around with that, I guess, straight bitch mode, fuck off to the world attitude for a lot of years until I got into adulthood. And one day I woke up and realized that I had ended up crying because people were making me feel bad for who I was. And it was like the opposite of what my dad intended. And that's a whole other story for me to go into. So we'll stop that right there because it's not part of this story. But that created the core of me to this day. And the next day, though, after that, I went to school. And the kid with the whole frying pan, make fun of me, black teasing, all of that, he was back on his normal track. And I just remember that I was still at that point where I had had enough. Again, 12 years old, I just had enough. And I remember throwing him up against the wall and telling him to shut up and he better not ever say anything again or I'll beat the crap out of him. And then he began crying and he began crying. And at that same moment, my asshole teacher came around the corner and saw that I had thrown him up against the wall. It was like all happening at the same moment. And so he yelled at me and sent me to the principal's office. And luckily, and I still believe that this is why this happened this way to this day, but luckily the principal was Hispanic. And he was on my side because I told my teacher the story and my teacher didn't give a shit and he just blamed me and then it was all my fault and whatever. But I think that the reason that the principal being Hispanic was the reason why that he ended up being on my side and the kid ended up being suspended. Because although bullying has been a thing for God knows how long, it wasn't taken that seriously back then. Nobody really cared as much as they do now. Now, here's the deal. I tell you this story because this is the beginning of the strong woman that you see now. This is the beginning of the person that's going to help you change your life. And I don't know if this is a shitty story because to me it's a power story, right? So I'm going to call it that. I have power story after power story after power story, and you're getting ready to hear another one of what has helped make me who I am. And I just thought, you know what? There's no better, way to start this podcast out than just lay it out, right? Like, I'm not here to, like I said, fluff you up and like rainbows and butterflies. I want you to know the heart. Like, we all go through some fucking shit. And everybody's shit is, different and sometimes is worse. And some people have it a little better and whatever it is. But I want you to know just a little bit of my shit if you're going to take this journey with me so that we could be like connected, right? So we could be soul friends along this journey. So let's now fast forward to my adult life in 2008. And let's talk about what happened. So I'm a very spiritual person. And when I say that, I don't mean like I go to church all the time and pray. I mean, I see ghosts. Okay. Now just follow me for a second. Don't turn off the podcast. Just stick with me. So throughout my life, I have dreamed a lot of deaths. This is not a made up thing. It's a gift and it's a curse at the exact same time. And I remember dreaming my stepdad's death because it happened over and over and over. Okay, it's so crazy. So in 2008, my stepdad and my mom had been married since 1999. They'd been together, quite a long time at this point. And it was about a year after my dad died or something when they got together. And I kept dreaming his death and that I would find him dead on the kitchen floor. Like that was what it was. He was just dead on the kitchen floor. So in real life, one like early morning, it had to be like 4 in the morning. My oldest son, Ronan, I don't know how old he was then, but he woke up sick. He was like throwing up everywhere. And we lived in the basement of my mom's house. And so I had to clean everything up and I was like getting him all ready. I got him all settled, his clothes changed, whatever, back in bed. And like I said, I was living in my mom's basement at the time and there was no bathroom down there. And I thought to myself in the moment, like, I have my little robe on. I'm like, dude, do I really need to pee? Because I was thinking, man, I have to pee, but do I really need to pee that bad? Or do go back to bed? Those discussions you have with yourself? Or can I just sleep through the night? And I was like, no, I need to go upstairs. I need to pee. Well, by the time I got him, settled and cleaned up and reset and all the things and back in bed, it's roughly about 5:00 in the morning at this point. And when I came upstairs through the basement door, I walked around the corner and there my stepdad was laying on the floor and he had a heart attack. And so I think that this was a really big turning point in my life. And that's why I'm sharing it with you, because this next part that I'm about to tell you of the story was just really, really cool. So, I mean, it's, again, I call it a power story because there's cool parts, there's shitty parts. It feels bad. It doesn't necessarily feel good, but it does when you're out the other side of that and you feel the strength that it's given you. And over the next few episodes of the podcast, we're going to be working on clearing your mind clutter and helping you put yourself first without feeling guilty. But I really think that it's important for you to understand who this person is that's going to be teaching you all of this, right? And I want you to know, like I've already said, that my life has not been all rainbows and butterflies. And I mean, everybody tells me I should write a book. I mean, even the man I'm married to now, just all the journey that we've been through with PTSD and the war. I mean, just so much. Like, it's crazy to think about. So anyways, while he's laying there on the floor, in my mind, he's dead. From what I can tell, I go straight to the phone and I dial 911. And as I'm dialing 911, I scream bloody murder for my mom because her room's on that same floor. And I just keep screaming her name over and over and over because she was sleeping. She came out, and I believe that this is a situation that also changed my entire life. It's like another strength foundation. And I bet you if you go through your life, you have strength foundations. The one question that I would have for you is, those strength foundations to your life, did you allow them to be strength foundations, or did they create fear in you, which made it shaky foundation, which is what you live your life on now, right? Because either shit you go through is a strong foundation that you could build a whole house upon, if you will, the house of your life, or it's a bad, shaky, cracked foundation, fearful of everything crumbling down around you. So that's like a really powerful, question for you. But for me, these stories that I'm telling you are strength foundations. So I will tell you this, my mom is my hero. And, you might have, if you've been with me for a long time, you might have had the opportunity to meet her when I went on tour speaking or on one of my lives, or you know me pretty well. So, my mom, like, she's just so amazing. Like, I absolutely love her. But she came out of her bedroom and she started CPR on my stepdad, and she didn't cry. She wasn't hysterical. I mean, she was like an angel. It was like that's what she needed to do. She was focused, and she was just saving his life with no panicking. Like, I can't even explain how amazing, and like, it was amazing and scary, right? This was a strength foundation and the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life in the same freaking moment. And I don't know. It was just so amazing. She's my best friend in the entire world. She's been through so much. So anyways, she's sitting there. She's doing CPR. And it was a long, long time because there was a blizzard and the ambulance couldn't get to the smaller town that we had built this house in, and they couldn't get there. It was so bad. So she's doing CPR for over an hour. They get there, he has some sort of a, pulse, and they leave to take him to the hospital. And oops, sorry, that was an alarm. At this moment, she says, well, I need to change my clothes, so we'll drive separately. It took us forever to get to the hospital. It was just so crazy. And anyways, he ended up dying. And so at this point in my story, my mom's buried 2 husbands, and it's just crazy. So like, my strength comes from her strength. So she's buried 2 husbands. I buried 2 fathers. And one of the things my mom has always taught me is to never wallow. Like, you don't ever fucking stay stuck in your shit. And that's why you'll love me. If you don't already know me and you stumbled on this podcast, this is why you'll love me. And if you do already love me and you've been in my world for a while, this is why you do love me, is because I never wallow. She has always said, you never wallow in your self-pity, never wallow in your life, you never wallow in your problems, because someone has it worse. She's always told me that. Someone has it worse. When I was a child and I was complaining about something, she would always say, you know what, Alishia? If everybody walked into the room and they laid their problems out on a table, you would gladly pick your shit back up and walk out the door. She was a tough mom, just a mean ass mom. She was always on me. I was always getting smacked for something. But she taught me so much. Like, I love her to death. Like I said, she is my best friend in the whole world. And she would say, I know right now you feel like your life is so bad, but if you would see what other people are faced with, you would gladly say, you know what? I'm good. Mine are not as bad as I thought they were, right? And even as an adult, I still feel the same way. So I'm not the type of person who walks around talking about how bad my life has been. And if you've never heard this story before and you've been in my world, you probably had no idea that I've buried 2 dads. And to tell you the truth, it's part of what has shaped me into who I am today, and will continue. These journeys that I've been through, these strength foundations, these power stories that I have, they continue to shape the next level version of me, which brings me to my next story. I know this is kind of a long episode. My goal is to keep my episodes right around 20 minutes, but I always have a lot to say, and it will be worth your time. So I was married at 19 years old to a thug, and I found out that he was cheating on me 4 months after we got married through an accident report that was filed with the car insurance. Because my best friend and maid of honor at my wedding is the one that called and made the accident report. She had ran off with him to a casino in Wendover, Nevada. They got trashed, and on the way back, they totaled my vehicle and almost killed her because the semi truck ran over the passenger side of the vehicle and basically ran over the whole right side of her brain, her head. And this all happened while he was supposedly needing space to find himself. By the way, never believe someone who says that. It's a crock. When you're married, you work together to build your individuality, right? Like, you don't get to just go have space for weeks and weeks at a time. Like, that's called a separation, but I didn't know that at the time. But when I was 21, I finally ended up with my junior high sweetheart for the last time. So the man I'm married to now is Daniel, and I met him when I was 13 years old, and he was 14, and I found him under the tree. So, but once I married him, or got with him, I guess at 21, it was only to find out that he was not the same person that I had always had as my friend and my love. He had gone to war and he had come back as a different man. So throughout our life together, we have fought and battled PTSD, and we've also won together. Not to mention the regular things that everyone deals with, like in-laws not accepting me and moving across the country where we knew no one to start a new life. And let me just say, my in-laws love me now, but it's been hell. And they've really only found out they've loved me in the last 7 months. So I am now 37 years old. I met my husband when I was 13, and now they love me. So you think about that for a minute. So I'm human just like everyone else. And honestly, you would probably rather have had your life than have had mine, right? Because that's the nature of the beast. Nobody really wants someone else's life. And I'll say there's probably some things that I'm forgetting that were big power stories and, strength foundations that I've built my life on because they didn't serve me to hold on to it. But I just wanted to share with you those really personal things so that that as you go through this training that I, like I said, am really real. My life hasn't always been rainbows and butterflies, and I would actually say it's never been rainbows and butterflies. But I'm always growing and learning just like you. Okay. And it's crazy. There's so many stories. Daniel and I have almost been divorced, and the comeback from that is another power story and strength foundation. But here's the thing. Ever since I was 10 years old, I knew that I was born to help people. And yes, my life has been a challenge. And yes, I've gone through a lot. But the point is, and this is something I really want you to hear, like to your core, your past life circumstances add to your mind clutter, which manifests itself in the quality of life you live today. Let me say that again. Your past life circumstances add to your mind clutter, which manifests itself in the quality of life you live today. Only when you harbor things that have happened throughout your life, instead of growing and moving on and moving through it all. So if you harbor it, then it adds to your mind clutter and it manifests in basically a shitty quality of life. If you grow and learn and grow and move through it all, then of course you're going to have a different life, right? I want you to know that by holding on to it, even if you've buried it deep, even if you shut it out, even if you haven't told anybody, even if you've said, I'm never talking about that again, and just put it in that deep, dark place, that dark space that I call it, that lives deep inside of you, it's really holding you back from your full potential in your life. Whether it's a business, whether it's a job that you have, or your personal life, it's holding you back from that. And it's my mission and the purpose and the reason why I'm here is to get all that shit out and release it once and for all, like I said, so that you can finally get out of your own way, put yourself first without feeling guilty, fight for yourself the way you fight for other people, and find yourself again. So I just want to welcome you again to the Soul Fire podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I know it was deep. I know it was raw. It probably gut checked you a few times, but that's me. So welcome to Power Coach Alishia and the Soul Fire podcast. We will see you next time.